Welcome, friends. We are going to learn about the quadratic formula today, and to start us off, I'm going to say, how do we solve quadratics in vertex form? And here we have a vertex form quadratic, and the way that we've learned is we would, and my writing is going to be perfect per usual, the way that we learned was I'm going to add 18 equals 2 times the quantity x minus 1 squared. Next move, I'm going to go divide by 2. I end up with, I'm going to start up here, 9 equals x minus 1 squared. The whole point of this is to get the quantity squared by itself, right? So now I'm going to get rid of the square because it's all by itself. By square rooting, I end up with 3 equals x minus 1. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, add 1. I end up with 4 equals x. Now, if we were trying to solve a quadratic in vertex form, that would be a very appropriate way of doing it. How about in root form? Well, it's a little bit easier in root form. We're going to slice it down the middle, and then we're going to set both sides to 0. X minus 3 equals 0, and I end up with minus 1 plus 3, and we end up with basically the opposite of what's in the actual parentheses. I get x equals negative 1 and x equals positive 3. Those are the two main ways that we've been doing this, and today, dealing with standard form can be hard, but today we are going to learn the secret weapon that everybody's been talking about. There she is, folks, the quadratic equation. We've got x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all the entire enchilada divided by 2 times the quantity a. Behold her glory. This is a prime piece of equation. But because it's so sweet, it can also be intimidating. Therefore, I'm going to give you a quick, I think, 5 steps on how we can deal with this monster of an equation. Before we just jump right into solving anything, let's look at our steps. And yes, I know there's 2 step 4s, Justin. I see it, Justin. I'm sick of hearing about it, Lil Justin. First step is identify. What we're going to actually do is look at our standard equation, ax squared plus bx plus c. And we are going to identify what a, b, and c are, and then we're going to put them back into our quadratic equation. Step number 2, we're going to do all the squaring and multiplying in one little sweep. Get that out of the way. Step 3, this is a small one, but very important. We're going to subtract inside the radical. That is the square root. That is the main portion of the quadratic. Next up, step 4, we've got simplify the radical. This means we could take the square root of something. We could factor out some simplifications. We could just remove the imaginary idea of I. This could possibly be our last step. And if it's not, we go to step 5, not step 4, little Justin. I know it says 4, but it's step 5, cleanup. And this is where we actually solve the equation, if it's at all possible. Is my writing perfect? Yes. Is it on this computer? No. But I'm going to do my best. First off, I'm looking at my equation. All standard equations are in this form. ax squared plus bx plus c. Notice that a, b's, and c's are the main population of the quadratic equation. So what we're going to do is actually identify which one is which. Well, my a is always attached to my x squared, and in this case it's going to be 1. There's no number there, and we just assume it's 1. Next up, my b's are always attached to my x, and in this case it's 3x, so my b is going to be 3. And then c is the lone wolf. She don't need no x, so we got c is just a number. Put a little hashtag there. Just kidding, it's a number sign. So our c is going to be 2. Now, the second part of identifying is actually putting it into this guy here. So let's do it. I'm going to stick with my x equals. Opposite b just means if it's positive, it becomes negative, and if it's negative, it becomes positive. So in this case, it becomes -3 plus or minus. I'm going to do this first. I get 3 squared minus 4 times my a, 1, and my c, 2. This whole thing goes under the square root sign, which is called a radical, and then it all gets divided by 2 times my a value, which is 1. Boom! We did it! Step 2 is to square and multiply. And I'm going to rewrite the whole thing because I think it makes it a little bit easier on us. I get x equals -3 plus or minus. I get 3 squared is 9. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. So I get 9 minus 8. This still goes under the square root. And then 2 times 1 is 2. Boom. We're almost there. Third step. We are going to subtract what's inside the radical. This might seem like a no-brainer, but it's something that is so important and delicate that we need to. I'm going to go over here. I get x, whoa, equals -3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 8 is 1. The whole thing's divided by 2. Now, this is the part at step 4 where we have to decide, is this problem done? And looking at it, I'm looking basically at what's under the radical. Can I get any sort of answer out of this? Or is this just silly and I need to stop? And this, because this is a number. -3 plus or minus the square root of something over 2 is a number, which a lot of people forget. So in this case, we're lucky because the square root of 1 is 1. So I get -3 plus or minus 1, all divided by 2. Now, I get a lot of questions about what does it mean to clean up? Well, in this case, it means I'm going to literally add -3 plus 1 as well as -3 minus 1. And then I'm going to divide both answers by 2. So plus 1, I'm going to get -3 plus 1 is -2. When I divide that by 2, I end up with -1. That is one of our answers. And then secondly, I get -3 minus 1 divided by 2, and that's going to equal -4 divided by 2, and I end up with -2. So my two full-blown answers are going to be -1 and -2. Should we try one more? Okay, guys, let's try and do this fast and neat. I get A equals 2. B, it's just minus x, so it's going to be a -1. And C is going to be +4. Now, first up, I'm going to put these in there. I get x equals. The opposite of -1 is going to be +1, plus or minus. I'm going to get -1 squared minus 4 times my A value, which is 2, times my C value, which is 4. All that stuff goes under the radical, and the whole thing is divided by 2 times A, which is 2. Next step, all my squaring and multiplying. So I'm going to get 1 plus or minus. -1 squared is 1. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 4 is 32, so I'm going to get minus 32. All that goes under the radical. The whole thing goes over 2 times 2 is 4. Next step, I'm going to subtract what's under the radical. X equals 1 plus or minus. I get 1 minus 32, and that ends up being -31. The whole thing is over 4. Pump the brakes. Stop. Can we do anything with this? Well, 31 is prime, So I can't do anything with that square root, but it is negative. Now, from last week, we know that the square root of negative 1 is I, and I can simplify it in that manner because I is an appropriate answer, whereas the square root of a negative number is not an appropriate answer. So there is one singular thing we can do, and we're done with this problem, and that is x equals 1 plus or minus, I pull out the I. I keep the square root of 31 because this is a number, and the whole thing is divided by 4. We could put the square root of 31 into a calculator, and we would get some miserable long decimal that we don't care about. Or we could keep it like this, and everything is at least concise, short, and easy to understand. Hope this helped.